But you and I know in terms of maturity, if you look at something like contingent workforce, that's been a fairly well solved problem in terms of service provision, technology, and things like that for probably, well, it's been going on for a good 20 plus years. And it's a pretty mature level for a lot of organizations. When you get into the services space, this is where it's far less mature, the statement of work, services procurement stuff. But that kind of comes into one of the first points that I wanted to discuss with you, which was something that we've spoken about before, which is this evidence of a shift in some cases from a contingent approach to more of an output and outcomes deliverables based approach. And I think, as you said to me before, that ties into the bigger underlying shift from kind of like a contingent labor mentality to more of a total workforce mentality. But what is it for you that is making that visible, that shift, and what for you do you think is driving that behavior, if that's something you're seeing happening?
Well, I think as I mentioned before, we put together a category strategy that was, on yearly increments to be able to determine which sourcing projects would take place. But it really was that 3 to 5 year outlook that was total talent management. We knew that it was going to take the businesses some time to be able to get their head wrapped around what total talent management meant. Um, and uh, and I think to this day, as I mentioned earlier, that split between where the budget sits is a big part of that. HR, all employees, they don't want to talk about total talent management because they've already managed their total talent of employees. So one of the things that we did in our strategy was to make sure that we started to execute on the different variations. So contingent labor, temp, the independent contractors, freelancers, and the SOWs. So those were the three that we focused on. So I think in that consolidation, we had a really good handle on being able to bring the temp labor population to place. At a person that at GE that had developed a workflow process for SOWs, very successful. He was able to not only put a workflow in place that shortened the amount of time for processing, but he was also able to grab the data in a way that a VMS tool couldn't grab. So we decided to continue on with that buying channel and not use the one size fits all that an MSP is offering. So we separated that out. And then lastly, we also did the same thing for independent contractors. There's that unique need for independent contractors. I think some of the challenge in the scope of work and the independent contractors come with who manages the budget. The function manages the budget, so they're going each function. That's where that partnership comes in so heavily to be able to make sure that one, you can sell them, that procurement can help them. You have to demonstrate that over and over and over, and then you have to have the data across a pretty long period of time to prove that it works. And it was successful. It wasn't successful in every client at Genpact, with the exception of putting together a strategy with a hope and a prayer that they might get to total talent management. But again, that was a business decision that as they were going through transition, they weren't ready for it yet. So I think there's some businesses that are ready, and I'm sure there are several that are functioning in the same way, that are looking at those three components and putting it together. But that, I think, is where the evolution that we're going through with AI is going to be able to help a lot. And I think from our last conversation, the pieces that you showed me about what you're doing on the supplier side, as well as all of the back end milestone reporting and all of that, give that more context to be able to prove that what was bought and paid for was received, and that the company got good value from being able to go through that process and have a good result from that SOW. So I think there's a movement afoot more towards I would say a guided buying channel specific for SOWs, all sorts of SOWs. I will say the last SOW that we put through Zivio for one of the clients at Genpact when I was there, really successful opportunity. The stakeholder involved had hated, literally hated working with sourcing. It was very cantankerous. He was just very difficult to work with. And we said, we're going to do it anyway. And lo and behold, it was an enormous success because of the savings and the collaboration that was evolved to be able to turn him from an adversary to an ally. So it was, I think those kinds of stories, get out, leak out, say, hey, wait a minute, we did this over here. If we can do it for a tax department and we can do it for engineering, who are very, very different, it's an opportunity for others to try it. And some of their either their best partnerships or some of their worst.
I love it. That's a brilliant example. I think one of just going back to what you were saying earlier about that taking that total talent approach, ultimately, if you've got all of the data across your different channels, you can make an assessment. You can then strategically evaluate that and start doing planning and predictive analytics. Obviously, the data is going to be different. Several of those channels are going to be individuals and time, and that is well handled by the kind of VMS landscape. They're designed for contractors, temps, to a certain extent, freelancers, but it's all people and time. Obviously, when you get into the deliverable-based projects, that could be a block of consulting allocation. It could be a sprint in an agile process. It could be project deliverables. It could be works where it's a telecoms installation. So there's kind of like professional labor involved, and there's also items involved. So it gets more complex. So you start having different types of data to compare, but that's not really the problem for most organizations. The problem is they don't have that data, particularly in services.